ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is probably a need that most people have heard of and have had experience with. That's because the CDC reports approximately 1 in 10 children are diagnosed with it. However, there were many times I thought I understood it, yet I was lost on how to respond to it. Is it an issue of discipline, or do we let them run off their energy? It's not quite clear. But then again, maybe it's the understanding of what ADHD actually is that's not clear. To challenge my understanding, I sat down with someone who grew up in a core with an ADHD diagnosis.
My name is Mathijs Arens, and when I was about 8 years old, I was diagnosed with ADD, although that is now a part of just ADHD. My brain does not produce enough serotonin. So because my brain doesn't produce enough serotonin, it makes it difficult for me to concentrate. Other people have just the right level, and I don't quite have enough. My brain doesn't produce enough naturally. For some people, the hyperactivity comes in the form of having to move or having to constantly bounce or maybe move their hand or stand up and sit down and move around. For me, I can sit perfectly still, but my mind can be everywhere and can be nowhere. It really just depends.
To understand the full scope of ADHD, I also met up with a marriage and family therapist who works closely with children in the school system in hopes to gain from her knowledge and experience.
My name is Kelly Rodriguez. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I work in the mental health field on the community-based and private practice with children and families. And I am also a soldier of the Salvation Army. I work with children in the mental health field. I've been working for about almost 7 years. ADHD is a mental health diagnosis. And this, I want to clarify that it's not a learning disability. A lot of people think that it's a learning disability. So, for example, we have two types. One is the inattentive type, and the other one is hyperactive or impulsive type. So inattentive children with ADHD, you'll see a lot of forgetfulness. Sometimes you talk to them and you feel that they're ignoring you, and you feel like it's probably coming across as defiant. And you have the hyperactive and impulsive type. These are the children who have a lot of energy. They're non-stop. They have difficulty staying seated for a long time. They talk all the time. They're non-stop. They interrupt often. Their brain processes information in a different way. For example, sometimes you might talk to a child who doesn't have ADHD and you provide a lot of information, and this child is able to look at you, concentrate, and retain all the information. While the ADHD child is looking at you, is trying to pay attention, but he's keeping some of the information you're doing. So the brain is kind of like jumping and it's only retaining some of the information. There's a chemical imbalance that sometimes happens in the brain of the child, and this child has no control over that.
The doctor described it to me that it wasn't a bad thing, it was just a different part of who I was, another obstacle that I had to overcome. In many ways, it was a relief to know that there was a reason I was struggling in school. So I had to sit and do my homework, and when I was done with my homework, I could leave and go and play outside with the rest of the kids. I was usually one of the last kids to finish homework. I could not focus my brain, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't focus my brain on what was in front of me. This became really frustrating for me.
They hear a lot of, stop doing that, you're in trouble again, why aren't you listening, why don't you finish, what's wrong with you? If they're in the classroom and you point out a behavior in front of their peers, they're gonna feel shamed. They're gonna shut down on you. They're gonna feel like, okay, here I go again, I'm in trouble again, I did something wrong, it's me.
I could see why it would be difficult for a child, let alone a family with a child who has ADHD, to struggle to stay connected to a church, where it feels like there are expectations about how a person should behave or how a person should perform. By the grace of God, I have a mother who was very well aware of my struggles with ADHD, completely understood them, and was in a position where she could help. What worked for me was having my mother to sit with me to answer questions, even quietly during church services, to be able to release some of that energy some of those questions that I had. The culture of the church that I grew up in had an atmosphere that accepted and promoted people speaking out loud, asking questions as the sermon was taking place. There was an aspect of breaking church rules that was okay. When it comes to church, I found connection to the material, to the Bible, to Christ, to what I was learning in the small group setting of Sunday school and junior church. Being in a smaller group gave me fewer things to pay attention to. I could focus on a small group of people, on a small piece of material, and really focus on that. So I joined the worship team, and I felt like I had some element in the church service that I could connect to. I wasn't just sitting there expected to be quiet and listen. I could do something. I could stand up, move to a different part of the room, and participate.
Simple things can help. If you have a one-on-one conversation with this child and you let him know you are there to help him, like, hey, we can have a signal, right? Like whenever you feel like things are getting overwhelming, you can tap your desk once or twice, you can raise your hand, you can come up to me, and then I know you need a break. Not having them close to windows, for example, that can be really distracting for them, not having them too close to doors where they're gonna be just looking up whenever someone passes by. Find ways to praise these children. Like I said before, a lot of these kids have heard so much negativity wherever they go. So you have to take the time. You have to be intentional about finding what this kid is good at. A lot of these children might be good at helping out with other tasks. So maybe you can give them a role in the classroom. If you're having a long class, it is going to be kind of tedious, or maybe a lot of reading or sitting down for a long time. Maybe you can ask this kid to, hey, can you help me out with something? Can you help me pass around the books or something like that? So that gives this child a physical break, a mental break, and then he can reconnect again in the class. The role that we have is to be a support system for this child, that this child can feel, church is accepting who I am, know who I could be. They're not telling me, hey, if you only try harder, you'll be so good at this. But it's more pointing out, like, you're doing this good right now. I appreciate your effort. This is working. Look how good you're doing in this area. So I think we need to stay away from diagnosing people, because it is not our role. Our role is to find support, to find ways to offer this child resources that he can utilize to feel like he's fitting in with us. Even though if he's learning in a different way or she's learning in a different way, it doesn't mean that they're not welcome in our community.
If we can fully understand ADHD and how it affects a child from their perspective, we can begin to respond in a healthy way that promotes inclusion and affirmation. Finding a way to channel their focus and energy can serve the individual and the whole congregation.
Being able to see how children with ADHD maybe respond in certain situations, in certain types of environments, in certain types of church culture will help the church to respond to these children, to keep them engaged, to keep their families engaged, to keep them interested in what's happening at church.
Let us not allow ourselves to be overcome by the distractions posed by ADHD, but let's see the opportunity presented for the child within the safe space that is the church.
We have a huge opportunity to become a positive voice for these children. And I think one of the main things is that we need to help these children feel that they're seen, that they're understood, and that they are accepted.
Being able to see those challenges will help us to step back, change our church environment, change our church culture, and help these children to know Christ.